So back on March 31st, right up here, we saw a $9.2 billion dark pool print. This was a signature print. This is very rare. To see something specifically over $3 billion for a signature print is pretty rare, let alone at $9.2 billion. That is very rare. Look at what happened afterwards. We fell all the way down to 362 on SPY from where that print was around 455, roughly 456. That is a huge downward move. It was 1,000 points on SPX after we had this print, and that is something that I am looking for in a similar approach for this rally right here, because this rally mimics the March rally. It's a very similar in terms of the rally, because a lot of people were bearish near lows down here, and then it's just continuously squeezed out shorts to the upside. Very similar back in March. We had a similar thing like this. We hit the top of this resistance in this diamond pattern, which is also resistance up here that I have on SPX, and we saw this big dark pool print, which was confirmation that there was very likely going to be some more downside after, and ended up being a lot of downside. So I'm looking for something like this, because that can give us a glimpse on if big money is selling prior to a large sell-off. And in today's video, I'm going to explain how you can determine if these dark pool prints on any ticker, whether it be SPY, Apple, Google, whatever, you can determine if they are accumulation or distribution, and use it as a part of your trading strategy. So to understand dark pool prints a little bit more here, I'm just going to go to Apple as an example, and I'm going to give you just a baseline example. This broke out big time from all the way back here, which we actually did talk about quite a while ago, back in early or July, maybe end of June, I think it was, before we were around this range, and we did break out of it. This is what I'm expecting to happen in a break, and I'll go over here to the 50-minute chart to get it more precise, but a break of this roughly 141 to 142 range is going to be very, very crucial, and is something that could send this thing all the way up to almost 150, honestly. And what happened was it continued up for a very long time, and it's still rallying right now, which is just incredible that it has been able to do that. What's very interesting, though, is these two red lines I have on here. So this first red line at 161 was a $1 billion dark pool print on Apple. That's a lot for an individual ticker to have 1 billion. SPY, it's definitely a lot to have 1 billion on SPY. However, it's more common. Apple, very rare to see singular dark pool print that's 1 billion. Another one right here at 166 something. We saw 1.5 billion right here. These are two very large and very rare prints, and I find it exceptionally odd that these prints occurred up here when they were most likely loading, and we did see dark pool prints, a lot of them down here around this range. Is big money really buying into this rally up here around like 166? Yeah, definitely. By the way, we are well above it, so by all means, it could have been a buy. However, eventually they'd probably want to sell if this was a short-term trade. You have to remember, dark pools are only shares. So because it's shares, it's not going to be affected by theta like a contract would be in terms of options. This is shares. They could be, you have to remember this, by the way, they could be buying, let's say, Apple, and have maybe a 20-year price or a 20-year time frame behind it. So it can be a bit difficult to determine if they are, or at least trade based off of that, because of these two prints occurring where they may have a very long time horizon. Remember, we don't know. We don't have an expiration with it. We can use stuff like the options order flow over here to get an idea of where the expiration is on things. But for dark pools, it's a little bit more vague in terms of timing. However, I have noticed some things such as what we are seeing right here, where we see two of these big prints. They may be trimming on the way up during this rally, which may show some form of a slowdown as we're going up. And these are definitely warning signs to see as we continue up. Now, could we continue going higher? Yeah, for sure, if it wants to. However, the more dark pool prints I see as we climb up, same exact thing with SPY right here, the more dark pool prints I see as we climb up, ideally well over 2 billion for signature prints just consistently each day, and hopefully a very large print like back on March 31st like I showed you in the intro here. That would give me a lot more confidence of that downside move approaching, because we've seen it characteristically in the past where the big rallies are a precursor to a lot of downside afterwards, and that dark pool print, or many dark pool prints, is a very good tell-all of when it will actually fall over. And the same exact thing goes for the upside. We saw a ton of dark pool prints happen right before we started to take off back on July 13th, 14th, and 15th. We were seeing upwards of 3 billion each day, roughly 2 billion maybe around these days prior to this big move upwards. So they were accumulating prior to the move. Right now, we have been in a very large accumulation stage for these past couple of weeks down here. And part of the reason I believe that is because of the dark pools. So if we go to the dark pool levels here, this features the fourth one down on the Cheddar Flow application. And we scroll down. This is only Friday, by the way. On Friday, we saw a 2.4 billion singular dark pool print. That is very, very rare. So I am looking for something similar if we are to see downside in the future. I'd like to see a lot of those types of prints up here in a very similar aspect, and that can just give you a general baseline. Is this going to be the tell-all and be 100%? No. I only use dark pools as one of many variables along with my trading. We're never here to tell you guys to only use order flow or only use dark pool data to determine your trades off of. It's only a variable to include, just like an indicator in a sense. Like you would use the moving average or something. This is just something else to help to determine if maybe they are accumulating or you suspect them to be accumulating like they were down here, or we saw a billion plus prints around this level. And then also the same thing, are we starting to see signs of distribution up here? Because are people really going to be buying, or at least let's go back to this example again. We had a huge rally off of this. We see a $9.2 billion print on March 31st right here with a big sell day. Is somebody really buying all the way up here after this rally with such size? Is it possible? Yes, but there was no follow through after. We had this day where it got picked up and the green day afterwards, but we never got back above the candle of that day. So the fact that this was red should be a very good sign that, hey, this thing is pretty weak right now, especially after that print. We need to be careful here because this thing isn't continuing to go up. So they weren't buying the dip. It ended up being a sell, and they were able to sell prior to this huge downside move afterwards. So you have to use a bunch of context clues. Obviously, also incorporate your TA, whatever you also use for other variables. But I like to include this because it gives me insight on determining if, hey, seeing signs of distribution like we saw back here. And I love using this as an example because it was such a rare print, one of the largest prints I've actually ever seen hit the tape in the dark pool. So I'm looking for something similar throughout this rally if it decides to do so, and I can use my risk based on, for example, the previous high that we had right here at like 461, based on if I were to go short off of that. So another thing with it though, because we don't know the time range of when they're buying this or selling it, you would have to incorporate other things like I shared with you in terms of other variables like technical analysis and everything. But also, if you are weighing heavily on dark pool prints, like if we saw a big one up here, it's not like you're out of the woods. Because if you see here on Apple, if we go back to it, we saw the $1 billion print, we saw a $1.5 billion print. We're over by $12 from the original print here, and well over the 166 one. So you're definitely, if you were to short off of this, you'd definitely be down. So time in this case would be your friend, and adding longer term contracts, which I actually have puts on Apple for longer term. I have January of 23 for Apple right now. After I saw the second print for 1.5 billion, I had it at 167 roughly. So I'm down on it right now, but I have a lot of time. So that's a good thing I have on my side, because I don't know, are they trimming on the way up and will it continue higher, or are they just selling completely out of their position? We don't know, but I'm using this as a context clue, especially after we rallied all the way since June 17th over here. It's been rallying since June 17th all the way up here. Are people really buying up here? I find it highly likely. Is it possible? Totally. Probability says it could go either way, but in my opinion, the odds are in my favor here that we're probably going to see some form of downside, or at least some form of a pullback, maybe back to like the previous channel line they have, roughly around like 157, because of prints like these, along with a lot of other aspects that I use. But I did use this as a heavy variable with my thesis, so that's just kind of how I like to determine it. Going to SPY again, because this is the one that gets the most volume in terms of the dark pool, like we saw today. If I scroll down, you can see we had $2.1 billion worth for a signature print. You have to remember, signature prints are made up of multiple different prints throughout the day that are hitting the tape. It's not just one. We call signature prints when they have multiple, and then a singular is when there's only one print, like these over here. So each day we typically see signature prints hit the tape. This one had 20 different orders that made up $2.1 billion worth of premium, and this one was at 427.16. So this is a decent amount of premium for sure. Nothing like insane, but definitely decent, especially because we've seen the past couple days, like if we go back to Thursday here, we saw this day actually didn't have that much. Friday we did have a decent amount. Yeah, on Friday we had 1.8 billion, so it's been around that 2 billion range. So that's nothing too crazy, but again, definitely is something to watch. And people like to find like some easy way to determine if it's a buy or sell right after it hits the tape or the day afterwards. It can be hit or miss with these. Sometimes you'll have an idea, like especially after if there was a big pullback following a large print. But like something like this, 2.1 billion at 427.16. If we go to the chart here, 427.16 is right below where we closed on the day. So like right around, 427.16, right around here. So not too much lower from where we are right now. A lot of people like to see if the daily closes above it to determine if it's buy or sell. You have to remember, these could be very long-term bets. This all the way up through here, all these big prints you've seen, they could be sells. as we've been going up so far, which is what I'm expecting. So if they're selling all the way up, that's not something you can trade short term based off of. You can't just look at it and think, oh, I'm going to take weekly contracts to the downside because I think they're selling on the way up. This is stuff that takes a longer time to play out, and I want to make sure I ingrain that in your heads because people are trying to find very, very precise ways to use dark pools on a short term aspect. These are not going to be something to get precise levels off of unless it's a very large print like we saw back here. There may be a lot more downside following because a lot of people know that those are large prints, but I like to see this play out. I like to see signs of kind of like a slowdown and weakness, or at least in this case, we saw us rally a bunch. If we see very large prints up here, highly likely, like I said earlier, that it would be a sell. This was just an example because back here we saw a very similar format of that. So that's kind of how I like to determine if it's accumulation or distribution. Those are just some simple ways that you can use. There are other ways as well that you can kind of find out. Some people try to look at the tape, and this is a key thing here too. They try to look at the time and sales tape on like Thinkorswim, for example, for their brokerage, and it does show a color when these hit the tape. Like for signature print, for example, when it's delayed by 24 hours. It does show a color 24 hours after, like red or green, but that's an auto color that's assigned. They don't actually know if it is a buy or sell because these are dark pool orders. These are coming through on a dark exchange. The lit exchange is what you and I trade on. Dark exchange is where big money trades on. It's an alternate trading system, ATS. That's what they call it. So we can't determine if it's a buy or sell just because of that and because of the rulings there. So they're auto assigning a color. A lot of people think because it's red it means it's a sell when it comes through on the tape, or vice versa. If it's a green, it's a buy. In my whatever I've seen in terms of my experience, that's not the case, and it's just auto assigning it. So I wouldn't look too heavy on that to determine if it's a buy or sell or not. But I do appreciate you guys watching this video today. Continue to look for if we see very large prints, not only on SPY but also on stuff like Apple, Microsoft, etc., because that can be a sign of a possible pullback coming up, or maybe people are offloading their shares after such a large rally, and that can give us very good clues into the future of the market.